Yes, Laureate. Wait. Laureate, symposiasts, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this Nils Klim Symposium in honor of the 2024 Nils Klim Laureate, Siddharth, Sareen, from the University of Stavanger, Norway. My name is Bjørn Enge Bertelsen, and I'm the academic director of the Holberg Prize. The Holberg board awards annually the Nils Klim Prize to outstanding young scholars from or working in the Nordic countries, in the humanities, social sciences, law, and theology. We welcome all of you that are present here in the University Aula in Bergen, as well as all of you that follow the event on the live stream from across the globe. For the Nils Klim seminar, the laureate is asked to both propose a topic, as well as suggest persons with whom he or she would like to converse. We look forward to taking part in the presentations and discussions during this year's Nils Klim Symposium in honor of Siddharth Sareen. And for his symposium, Professor Siddharth Sareen has chosen a highly interesting and I would think a hugely relevant topic for today's world: reflect and act, energy, social science, and impact. To present the laureate and the symposium speakers, I hereby give the floor to Kjetil Rommetveit, Professor of Science, Technology and Society here at the University of Bergen. He will be moderating the event. Please, Kjetil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bjørn, for the introduction. Dear Nils Klim and Holberg committees, dear rectorate, dear members of the audience, remote and far, and dear members of the symposium itself. I'm highly honored, and it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce this symposium and this year's laureate, Siddharth Sareen. It's a great pleasure, both because he works in a field that is of great interest to me, also because he's a great friend and colleague that I encounter here at the University of Bergen, so he has a long relation with the University of Bergen. And because we have a very good group of excellent scholars here to discuss his research with us today. So I will start out by presenting Sid, as I will refer to him, and then I will present the panel participants as we go along. So, Siddharth Sareen came to Norway and Bergen in 2017 to do a postdoc at the Center for Energy and Climate Transformation, CET. And he has also worked at the Center for the Study of the Sciences and Humanities, where I'm located. Since that time, he has made a highly impressive and rapid career. He is currently Professor of Energy and Environment at the University of Stavanger, and he is now on his way to the Fridtjof Nansens Institute in Oslo for a new position as a research professor in energy and society. Before coming to Norway, Sid completed his early education in various parts of his country of birth, India, at 3 schools of the Krishnamurti Foundation of India. Through the pedagogical philosophy of these schools, he was exposed early on to holistic thinking, art, collaborative approaches, and to nature as a source of inspiration and learning. He took an interest in the interrelations between the environment, justice, and activism, and he completed an integrated Masters in Development Studies in 2011. The thesis was on child poverty and access to primary education, and it was carried out at the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. During these early years of academic study, Sid also worked as a freelance journalist and traveled more than 200,000 kilometers, according to himself, by train across the vast Indian subcontinent. Not unlike the fabled Nils Klim, Sid's travels and his encounters with different places and peoples and also with extractivist approaches to nature and environmental injustice, undoubtedly played a role in his choice of field of study. After completing his master's, he won an award for an essay entitled "Europe and India, a Reciprocal Way?" This brought him to Aarhus in Denmark, where he developed a PhD proposal. After that, he received a dual PhD scholarship, which took him to Copenhagen and Padova, Italy. He completed his PhD within the field of development studies, focusing on forestry practices, indigenous peoples, and resource conflict in Central Eastern India. Since that time, Sid has expanded on his inter- and transdisciplinary approaches to also include fields such as political ecology and human geography. He has increasingly focused on energy and energy transitions, mainly in India and Europe, but more recently also in East Africa. And he has taken a special interest in the potentials and pitfalls of solar energies. His research spans broadly across these just mentioned disciplinary fields, across regions and scales, and across different domains, from energy practices, infrastructures and governance, over local and urban capacity building and participation, to questions of how to articulate, approach, and realize low-carbon futures. Lately, I have also heard him referring quite a lot to what he and others call prefigurative politics. How to act in the present in order to bring about desirable and sustainable futures as we imagine them. To Sareen, this way of thinking, which is academically grounded but with a strong relation to activism and to politics, runs through most of his activities. And this also includes his everyday life together with his wife Annie, his daughter Indus, and the dog Fado, and whoever is as fortunate as to be his friend or neighbor. After settling up here in the Nordics, Sareen has engaged in an impressive number of collaborations across Norway, Scandinavia, Europe, and the US, and across the global north and south. He has been involved in a great number of collaborative research projects, such as the Engager Network on Energy Poverty. Through such collaboration, he has been a main contributor to agenda setting within energy social science, transition studies, and sustainability science. Sareen has a peculiar way of working and can frequently be found engaged with local events, actors, and activists. He has a particular way of expressing even highly complicated technical issues, which are too often left to be explained by engineers, technicians, bureaucrats, and the occasional economist. To overcome such barriers of communication, Sid uses forms of expression such as poetry and comics, and frequently also engages with artists to get his message through to wider publics. I'm really looking forward to this session where we will get to see and hear about Sid's approaches from himself and in collegial exchanges with a group of excellent scholars seated here at the front, who themselves hold strong perspectives and positions on several of the topics and issues of the day. So on that note, I leave the floor to the main person himself. Please, Sid.
Extraction of hydrocarbons have resulted in significant ecological damages to the water, to the air, to the land.
So the world desperately, urgently needs to decarbonize, but it's obviously a tremendous challenge as well.
Solar energy is the largest growing source of energy in the world every year of the 2020s.
Solar energy is developing at such a pace that people are now concerned that it's displacing people, food production, and wildlife.
And so we're increasingly seeing solar developers trying to site solar panels on farmland, and that creates a conflict.
And that makes it so important for us to try to understand how it fits into particular contexts, at what spatial scales it's rolled out, And as we discuss this among scholars who are working with these rapid energy transitions in different countries at different spatial scales,
We need to ask ourselves collectively about energy presence and energy futures.
and to the kind of energy futures that we all want to see and can all be part of.
We're gathered here to look at this growing intersection and conflict between solar power production and food growth on agricultural lands.
What are the tensions associated with rapid expansion of solar energy?
It is a marvel of our global history, however uneven, that academic institutions exist in every country worldwide. Israel's destruction of these places of learning and reflection in Palestine during 2023-2024 was ground for such solemn concern precisely because the loss is almost unfathomable. Universities and other institutions of research and higher education stand, like us researchers, on the shoulders of giants. These are not just intellectual giants, although they have certainly been central to building up the sciences and humanities. They are also administrative geniuses, savvy politicians, and supporters of learning who have, over the past several centuries, collectively ensured that these institutions are founded, nurtured, expanded, and able to endure in the face of countless societal challenges. The life of the world is plagued by many a quandary where it momentarily seems easier to tear down than to build up. Yet wisdom lies in nourishing continuity with the past, even as we engage in the present and turn our minds and actions towards various desirable futures. That we have these academic institutions as physical temples of learning, rooted in often inequitable and problematic pasts, and yet serving to convene our emerging generations alongside the stalwarts whom society has invested in over the passing decades, is an extraordinary achievement. So we find ourselves as social scientists working in these hard-won and painstakingly kept institutions in the fight of our lives, not just as researchers, but as part of societies worldwide that are confronted with climate change and our seemingly collective inability to nip the problem in the bud. The manifestation of the actual phenomenon is its countless avatars: wildfires, floods, droughts, storms, heat waves, melting. Multifaceted as it may be, is but one aspect of the problem. It runs skin deep. Crack the surface and complex social contours are laid bare. Economic inequality, political concentration of power, lack of equal representation, marginalized perspectives, and social exclusion, self-serving incumbency and alienation from public interests are a handful of the key elements that constitute the messy assemblage that upholds the fundamental drivers of climate change, drivers that are anthropogenic. These drivers are, namely, the unwillingness of a small, privileged percentage of humans worldwide to accept sensible limits for responsible consumption within our planetary boundaries and Earth's regenerative capacity. The political failure to institutionalize systems that would prioritize sustainable production and block polluting supply-side practices, and the lack of popular resistance to our rollicking descent down the slippery slope of hubris into spiraling climate change, despite considerable lip service and well-meaning but modest efforts towards rapid mitigation. We are not in this fix, not as citizens nor as researchers, due to a lack of our technological ability as global society to transform our energy systems and rein in our economic systems to value sustainable practices and prioritize low-carbon activities, thereby dramatically reducing greenhouse gas emissions. A quarter millennium since the Industrial Revolution got going proper, the early 21st century has been the most heartening period of the modern era with respect to developing affordable, low-carbon energy sources that are rapidly scalable. Solar energy has become the most rapidly growing energy source worldwide in the 2020s. What we struggle with, however, perhaps more than ever before, is how to steer our collective human ambition and imagination towards valuing simpler things, finding beauty and joy without unbridled growth and runaway consumption, and most of all, caring for nature and each other. Unimaginable destruction has accompanied this era of industrialized warfare, rapacious capitalist extraction of natural resources from landscapes plundered beyond recognition, and the accelerated metabolism of human activities straining at the limits of Earth's abundance. In the blink of an eye, we are losing tropical rainforests, coral reefs, coastal ecosystems, glaciers, and the delicate balance that has endured for millennia to bring forth the lives that we so cherish. How strange and how terribly tragic that we seem unable to muster the requisite gumption to get our act together. Is this collective failure compatible with the same world that has kept alive its academic institutions, many of them incredibly well-resourced, to ensure the continuity of knowledge and advancement of our understanding of complex realities and concerns beyond our narrow interests and spheres of existence? This is a question that should concern social scientists. Given the primacy of our energy systems and the need to transform them for our very survival as a society, with some possibility of equity and inclusion, rather than mass struggles for survival and over a shrinking resource space in the midst of rising uncertainty, it is incumbent upon us to attend to questions of energy transition and transformation. Since the 2010s, dawning recognition of this responsibility has spurred on timely and exciting energy social science research and education. More than ever before, we now see insights propagate from and across energy geographers, energy science and technology studies researchers, energy anthropologists, political ecologists, environmental sociologists, energy humanities scholars, development researchers, and energy governance scholars such as political scientists. This brings me to the question I wish to address. Under dire circumstances worldwide, how can the insights that energy social scientists hold enable equitable transitions to low-carbon energy sources? Energy social science and impact. Reflection is a form of action at frontiers of understanding. It is important to recognize it, as it is at the core of all science and provides a foundation to inform action and impact. Energy social scientists have reflected upon the deadlocks and breakthroughs that relate to low-carbon energy futures. During rapid global innovation and power tussles over energy systems, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research is thriving. This means there is an increasingly solid basis in place for energy social science to inform and inflect decision-making on energy futures. Yet how does academic reflection translate into action to enable equitable transitions? To address this pressing query, it is vital to examine the roles energy social scientists play in governing energy transitions. We are peculiar creatures operating in academic institutions that are typically considered as being at a remove from the real world of broader society. The intent of giving people space to think and reflect, to exchange learning and build continuity into the knowledge enterprise comes with the risk of insulating researchers too much from the pace and urgency of particular societal challenges, such as climate change. While tens of millions of vulnerable peoples have been displaced already by the 2020s, and the global discussion increasingly recognizes our likelihood of causing several degrees of global warming well beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit of the Paris Agreement, and has begun to focus on loss and damage related to climate adaptation, energy social scientists have to worry about any number of far more banal concerns. Early career researchers have to consider job security and tenure, linked to which they make choices about their academic practice, such as where to publish outputs, what sort of disciplinary or interdisciplinary profile to cultivate, and how to land competitive research grants and then implement them, while maintaining some agency in developing particular competencies, conceptual engagement, and gaining experience with and across sectors and contexts. Mid-career researchers have a firmer appreciation of the complexity of academic practice and institutions, having navigated some of these themselves, and are more equipped to be deliberate in their choice-making, but also more burdened with responsibilities internal to the academy more than outward-facing for transdisciplinary engagement. Some use this phase to ripen particular competencies and priorities, for instance, advancing their societal outreach and striking up novel transdisciplinary collaborations as key parts of their oeuvre for impact. Senior researchers often have greater place attachment, having spent their influential career in a place over a span and cultivated extensive networks, playing an enabling, often invisible role, while dealing with the many demands that come with greater experience and carrying a larger share of responsibilities. At best, they build institutions around them to enable others. or contribute at a high level to advance and renew disciplinary practice all over the world. At worst, they become complacent and rest on their laurels, enjoying the creature comforts and recognition of the academy without giving back as much as they cost in sheer salary terms. While all of these broad strokes are generally applicable to energy social scientists as much as to other researchers, with caveats for individual variation, they require some refinement due to the distinct nature of such researchers. Social scientists are interested and trained in studying society while being positioned in relation to it, and partly in it, regardless of particular contexts of study and one's own trajectory, due to the very process of conducting research. We have never been used to some sort of assumed distinction from our subject of analysis, but rather approach this as a matter of contextual definition and explicit, situated engagement. This form of reflexivity is further sharpened when it comes to energy social scientists, conducting social science research on energy in the 21st century, even as energy systems undergo substantial, rapid, and in some cases frustratingly slow changes. It's an incredible challenge and opportunity to renew our understanding of change itself, whether applied to institutions, infrastructures, practices, relations of accountability, social difference, or related concepts and phenomena. While one never steps into the same river twice, a river being in spate or disappearing underground all of a sudden poses challenges with a quantum difference when compared to the more philosophical pondering of whether one's experience of a seemingly similar river is changed by less dramatic shifts in that entity and in oneself, as well as in one's surroundings with the passage of time. With energy transitions underway, albeit patchily, energy social scientists are grappling with changing topographies and ontologies at the core of our inquiry that place novel demands on our epistemologies. All this scene setting brings me back to the present question of what this reflexivity and momentousness of a particular scholarly inquiry does in terms of work in and on the world. How can the insights that energy social scientists hold enable equitable transitions to low-carbon energy futures? It can seem an ironic question at times when we inhabit worlds and practices in systems rigged for a rapid pace of production, exchange, and measurement. We travel relatively often and cause considerable carbon emissions in the process. We tend to be or become upper middle class people, at least over time, and often live in contexts where our personal spheres embody considerable privilege and security, even respect. And some of us work at quite a bewildering pace and with a span of coverage that many outside academia would find quite puzzling, even to the point of skepticism. How many things can one be an expert in? Say when evaluating grant applications, well, perhaps half a dozen, split by a lunch break. This is only meant half in jest. Energy social scientists are in high demand, with society catching up to the value of some of the work that we've been putting together since the early 2010s, in increasingly focused and cohesive ways. This means both that there is lots to be done, and also that researchers feel it incumbent upon themselves to contribute as much as they can, given the very real calamitous stakes that vulnerable peoples and nature increasingly face per force. Reflect and act. So to the end game. As energy social scientists, we navigate challenges in our ontological practice. We work hard, often consume highly in some respects, even while trying to be conscientious in others, and face trade-offs. Should we let a good article on a relevant theme go through or press hard of a marginal enhancement in quality, knowing it may well put back publication by many months? Do we pursue excellence for its own sake, as some sort of intellectual achievement, or do we value putting it to work for its logical implications equally, perhaps even more? This last issue is one that haunts the daily practice of researchers who care about impact, given the yawning gap between scientific knowledge and policy evolution and implementation. Fossil fuels have already been subsidized by trillions of dollars in the early 2020s, even as the world blows past globally agreed upon climate change limits, despite renewable energy sources having become economically competitive and being rapidly scaled up. The self-interest of elites drives poorly thought-out trajectories for future infrastructure development. For instance, continuing to tie many a city into imposing forced car dependence among its inhabitants, despite its energy and space intensity, or incentivizing people to take frequent leisure trips by air, by marketing it as a more desirable lifestyle choice, rather than promoting thriving local community activities and infrastructures. It can seem redundant to run projects that yield established insights about priority setting, or even meaningless, if the ample existing sources of evidence and analysis, policy advice, and outreach have yet to bring about even obvious measures for low-carbon energy futures. Being right for its own sake can only get one so far. And from a conceptual point of view, it can even become sterile. Railing against the political economy of a sector does less to advance novel understanding or inform real-world change than engaging with that political economy and teasing out why it refuses to budge. Perhaps such engagement, by situating knowledge among practitioners and forming unusual alliances, by percolating into the embodied knowledge of well-positioned actors who make decisions but lack time to keep up with the state of the art in their busy work schedules, can get us further than the most scintillating but ultimately alienating forms of critique that primarily serve to bolster our reputation among kindred spirits. This is not only an argument for transdisciplinary practice as something that adds value beyond one's academic discipline or disciplines. It is also an argument for such engagement beyond our comfort zone as an essential component of interdisciplinary exchange and disciplinary renewal. Reaching beyond one's comfort zone does not necessarily entail operating in discomfort. It can also be appreciated as a way to expand the safe space in which understanding can blossom across lines of difference. Yet this is hardly roses all the way. Transdisciplinary engagement is difficult, often disappointing, endlessly frustrating, and can leave one feeling alone, perhaps bitter, unappreciated, misunderstood. Many practitioners see energy social scientists as some sort of entertaining peacock, a novelty in a mix that usually comprises engineers discussing and operating transitioning energy systems, trained in different jargon and less equipped to partake in densely technical discussions. One can take something away from such experiences and dynamics, but it would be overly optimistic to claim that such exchange always or even often leads to change and mutually beneficial knowledge transfer. Far from it. Such exchanges can make one painfully aware of the Sisyphean task of building bridges across siloed modes of practice where we sorely lack common references and mutually aligned incentives. In a sense, this is the work we must perform, build a common basis in understanding. Not only or even predominantly with experts, but with all manner of political constituencies that need to join forces to rally for equitable low-carbon energy futures. In spending time working with and dwelling on the gaps and frustrations, we also identify the links where the chain of logic is frayed and where society requires informed advocacy and coalition building. We can cast light where darkness looms heavy. These are terms too often dismissed out of hand as having more to do with activism rather than with academia, which is reflective of another key fault line that striates intellectual and societal understanding. Energy social scientists are well positioned to see where things fall apart between our knowledge base for the requisite actions to mitigate climate change and build more equitable and low-carbon energy systems versus the poor track record of global action to date. We probe the nooks and crannies where things go awry and identify socio-spatial patterning at and across multiple spatial scales. It is we who must then take the lead in acting to enable political and material change. This can morph into a variety of forms, from actually participating in such measures to identifying pathways and activating others who are better positioned to catalyze and propagate particular kinds of action. In sum, our best chance of enabling low-carbon energy futures as energy social scientists is to be truly engaged researchers, engaged with those who make and implement decisions in the energy systems and contexts where we conduct research, engaged with those, both people and ecosystems, who bear the brunt of adverse impacts in ongoing energy transitions or stagnation to bring forward their marginalized perspectives, and engaged in wider public discussion to help engender improved societal understanding of the scientific basis that must direct our time-bound decisions at this crucial juncture. Embracing this lodestar will guide our academic practice along virtuous pathways in ways too manifold and context-specific for generic principles to do justice to. But it is painfully evident when such engagement is not the driving force of energy social scientists' endeavors, and it is a missed opportunity and abdication of responsibility. We have a historic moment we must seize, for which we require all hands on deck. The ethos of engaged research is what I refer to with reflect and act, and it is in doing so that we collectively imbue the idea of impact in energy social science with meaning. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this, Sid. You don't hear me? Yes. I think you have already justified the giving of the prize to you. You have both succeeded in describing a critical situation, and you have related this critical situation to our practices as academics. And you have not denied that knowledge is also part in producing the crisis situation in which we are. There would be no climate change without knowledge, in a sense. At the same time, you start to articulate a positive vision of how we can move forward, and an enthusiasm about academic life, which is sorely lacking in our present situation, I think. So thank you very much. I'm now going to introduce the next speaker, which is Marielle Aguilar-Støen. She is Professor of Human Geography at the University of Oslo Center for Development and the Environment, where she has acted as Deputy Director and Research Coordinator. Her academic interests deal with, among other things, political ecology, pandemics, environmental conflicts, the politics of food, and energy transitions. She has extensive experience with research in Scandinavia, Europe, and Latin America, and she has published widely and importantly on issues relating to environment and sustainability in all of these regions. So, Marielle, really looking forward to hearing your perspective on Sid's topic.
Thank you. I think this is yours, Sid. I'll leave it here. So this is my name, and this was the name I gave to my lecture. And I would like to start by saying a huge thank you for the invitation to participate in this symposium. I'm really honored and feel very happy to be able to interact with the 2024 Klim Sid Sareen, and with other colleagues here, and congratulations once again, Sid. I don't know you that well, but the little I know you, I can say that I'm always very happy for the generous being you are. You are really a generous scholar, and that is highly appreciated. Am I controlling this? So yeah, this is one of the things that Sid said towards the end of his lecture. It is we who must take the lead in acting to enable political and material change. And I want to reflect around this. And what I'm going to do in this lecture is to explore who these ones who must lead towards change are. And to answer this question, I will draw on some Marxist colleagues, Catholicism, post-structuralism, direct action, and feminism. So bear with me, please. So Sid's statement in the slide struck a chord with me. And it reminded me of the work of radical geographer Matt Hover. And in his book, which is that one, Climate Change as Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet, he argues that the climate crisis should be understood as a class struggle rather than simply a scientific or individual issue. And he posits that the primary drivers of climate change are the capitalist systems that prioritize profit over environmental sustainability, and specifically pointing to the carbon-intensive capitalist class as the main culprits. And Holberg is a critic, he criticized heavily the current climate movement for being dominated by what he calls the professional class. That scientists, journalists, and policy experts who often advocate for solutions that either rely on better communication of scientific facts, market-based mechanisms like carbon pricing, or individual austerity measures. He argues that these approaches are not enough because they fail to address the underlying power structures and profit motives that drive environmental change or environmental degradation. And to Holberg, the combination of meritocratic ideology so predominant in our universities and in the university worldview, which accords significance to individual effort and anxiety over one's relatively comfortable middle-class consumption, leads the professional class into the idea that we are primarily responsible for climate change. Against this backdrop, Holberg argues, emerged a core contradiction for the professional class, namely a desire for material security alongside increasing knowledge of ecological crises produced through a system of privatized provisioning. This contradiction leads to an inward politics rooted in what Holberg calls carbon guilt, which assumes that middle-class consumers are both largely responsible for and central to solutions to the climate crisis. So, having been born and raised Catholic, I can tell you a thing or two about guilt, but I think I agree with Holberg, or he has not said it, but I see his point, that we scholars might have a tendency to have some sort of overinflated perception of our own agency. So let me use a fellow Catholic. I'm an atheist now, but I used to be Catholic. Let me use a fellow Catholic now and post-structuralist to continue exploring the issue. So Bruno Latour, in his book, How to Inhabit the Earth, interviews with Nicolas Strong, discusses the pitfall of individualism and the inward focus it promotes. Latour argues that the prevalent focus on individualism has led to a disconnect between humans and the natural world, fostering a mindset that prioritizes personal gain over collective well-being and environmental stewardship. Latour suggests that the Anthropocene, a term describing the current geological age, viewed as the period in which human activity has been the dominant force on climate and the environment, demands a shift away from individualistic thinking. He emphasizes the need for a more collective approach to environmental responsibility, where individuals see themselves as part of a larger ecological system rather than isolated entities. This shift is crucial for fostering solidarity and cooperative action necessary to address global ecological challenges effectively. Latour's perspective on climate policies is deeply interwoven with his critique of modernity and individualism, and I think sometimes with Catholicism. He suggests that policies should aim to rematerialize our connection to the earth, meaning they should make people more aware of their tangible and direct impact on the environment. And he suggests that this will involve creating new rituals, narratives, and educational practices that reinforce our role as stewards of the planet. Yeah, so back to my childhood memories, I think that the sacrament of penance is one of my favorite rituals because there's no limit to the number of times one can sin, repent, and be absolved. But in the context of climate change, I think we need other types of ritual. I'm really very curious. I would like to see how a ritual involving issue that Atto mentioned today, how it will look today and how will it play in our fight against climate change. The next one is Jason Moore, who critiques the concept of Anthropocene by arguing that it is inadequate to address the root causes of ecological crisis, and he proposes the term capitalocene as a more accurate framework, emphasizing that the current environmental crises are fundamentally linked to the capitalist system. Moore contends that the Anthropocene concept, which suggests that humans as a whole are responsible for ecological degradation, obscures the significant role of capitalism in driving environmental destruction. He argues that it is not humanity in general, but rather a specific dynamics of capitalism, characterized by the relentless pursuit of profit, exploitation of labor, and appropriation of nature that have led to the current ecological crisis. This perspective shifts the focus from a broad, undifferentiated human impact to the specific socioeconomic processes underpinning environmental change. We are all humans, but not all humans are equal. And I just think it's important to remember that inequality has been on the rise, increasing since the 70s, and some Marxist thinkers are always also talking about the stagnation of our economy. Moore highlights that the Anthropocene, this narrative often overlooks the historical and systemic aspects of capitalism that have shaped our interactions with the environment. Yes. But I'm not the only one who thinks that we have no time to lose. And some colleagues have no patience anymore and want to see faster change, and they suggest to take action on their own hands. And now I'm going to talk about Andreas Malm, who in his book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Learning to Fight in a World on Fire, this geographer makes a provocative argument for the necessity of more radical tactics in the climate movement, specifically advocating for property destruction as a form of direct action. Malm contends that traditional non-violent methods, such as protests and petitions, have proven insufficient in combating the escalating climate crisis, and the fossil fuel industry's continued expansion. Malm identifies two main forms of pacifism within the climate movement. Moral pacifism, which opposes all forms of violence on ethical grounds, and strategic pacifism, which argues that violence and property destruction are counterproductive for achieving social change. He challenges the strategic pacifists by highlighting historical instances where movements combine non-violent and violent actions, arguing that property destruction can play a critical role in compelling systemic change. His central thesis is that the climate movement must escalate its tactics to include intelligent sabotage of fossil fuel infrastructure to create a significant impact and force a shift in public consciousness and policy. And he emphasizes that this form of sabotage targets property rather than people, drawing on historical examples like the suffragette movement and others to illustrate how such actions have been effective in the past. I'm not sure I agree with him. I'm just presenting his views. But I want to refer as the last one as the feminist movement. Because I think this movement provides examples of how alliances across classes and between scholars and activists can successfully drive change. Feminist scholars and activists, and I'm thinking about back in the 70s, form alliances that allow for constructive collaboration that literally changed the world as we knew it. They pushed for legislative reforms and collaborated in the dissemination of ideas through publications, conferences, and public lectures. And universities facilitated the exchange of knowledge between scholars and activists, strengthening the movement's intellectual and practical dimensions. And I want to put emphasis on exchange of knowledge. And this collaboration provided a theoretical foundation for understanding gender inequality and strategies for addressing it. So I think that we need to discuss and reconsider who is or should be included in the we that can form an effective movement for energy transitions. As Holberg comments, a politics of austerity has no appeal to the global peasantry and working classes, who, after all, are the majority of the world. Reforming the working week, as some argue is necessary for energy transformations, makes no sense to a large majority of the world who are struggling to find a job in the first place. And I will say that there are some portions of the European youth that feel alienated by climate and suggestions for climate policies. Yeah, I can talk more about that afterwards. So who are these we? I agree with Sid that scholars should lead doing what we know best how to do. And among other things, I think that we know very well how to teach and instill critical sense in our students. And we can, of course, also form alliances with those who effectively can drive historical change. But to learn who they are, we need to read history. And I've been given the latest changes in our university and also in Norway. I wonder if curiosity is still thriving in our university. Is diversity still a goal? But I mean a different type of diversity than what you can measure in the way we measure it today. And Norway, by the way, has recently introduced a fee to the foreign students, so foreign students are not coming as they used to before. But I would like to end to mention the work of feminist scholar Bell Hooks, whose work is known for its accessible writing style and commitment to bringing marginalized voice into the conversation. And her work helps shape a discourse around the importance of an inclusive approach to social justice. And I think that it is along such lines that I want to have an impact in society. So I ran out of time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I am looking forward to discussing further with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marielle. I think you respond to Sid's intervention in an excellent way, also bringing in broader social theories and also posing the question of alliance building and who is to be in that alliance. Okay, so I will introduce the next speaker, who is Harald Råraker. He is a professor of technology and social change at the University of Linköping in Sweden. He has both a technical and social science background and has been affiliated with a number of universities in Austria, Germany, US, and Sweden. His main research is on changes to infrastructures and governance in efforts to address climate change and transition towards low-carbon futures and societies. Thematically, he has focused on cities, energy infrastructures and transportations, and he has produced a number of highly important publications in these domains. So, welcome, Harald.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. It's really a great honor to be here, and congratulations to the Nils Klim Prize, Sid. Really a great achievement. reflect and act as a call for a critical and engaged social science is timely and needed more than ever in light of the grand problems our societies are facing today. In my talk, I would like to investigate the concrete and practical context of such engagement, namely the efforts of cities to govern energy and climate transitions. So it's more a report from the practice of trying to engage in a specific context of then also urban energy transitions. With this, I hope then to build on some of the powerful points which Sareen has raised in his talk, and also relate to some of the many contributions he has actually made in his academic work as an environmental social scientist, a body of work which we are celebrating here with the award of the Nils Klim Prize. What I would like to focus on is the need to build up new organizational and governance capacities in cities in order to deal with the complex problems such as climate change, rising inequality, the depletion of resources, and the need to transform our energy systems. Without doubt, fighting the energy and climate crisis and striving for a more sustainable and equitable development will require fundamental transformations of the way we work, consume, organize our economies, the way we are mobile, and what we also perceive as a good life. A more engaged social science could play an important role in building such urban capacities for change. That's my claim here. Not only in an instrumental way, but also in creating moments of reflection, serving also as a source of irritation for often very self-assured politicians and business-as-usual strategies. Cities and urban politics may be one of the places which offer a conducive environment for such an engagement, and the examples from Sweden, which I will refer to in my talk, are instructive, I think, for the struggles of such an engagement and which this brings with it. Cities have become a focal point of the consumption of resources, as well as the generation of environmental loads. The pressure and urgency of environmental problems is particularly high in cities, whether we talk about air pollution or the effects of climate change, such as heat waves or rising sea levels. It's also in cities where we can see the entanglement of these issues with social inequality and questions of justice. At the same time, however, cities also provide contexts, I think, which are favorable to developing sustainable alternatives. They are centers of knowledge production and cultural diversity. Due to proximity and density of actors and actor networks, make cities to a hotspot of innovation, experimentation, and transformation. Many larger and smaller cities actually have already taken a leading role in developing strategies and actions to become more climate friendly. The challenges cities are dealing with are indeed formidable and can hardly be solved with traditional, fragmented, and often very technocratic policy approaches, nor with a reliance on market solutions. So that's what we deal with very often as social scientists. Complex social and environmental problems have characteristics of what Riddle and Weber called wicked problems. Such problems are very difficult to define, and it's difficult even to agree upon what the problem is. There are no clear and straightforward solutions to a problem such as climate change, and attempts to provide solutions often create new problems at different places. If we think of new conflicts and injustice is created as a consequence of climate mitigation measures. Such problems often have a very long time scale and are hardly compatible with election cycles in politics. They involve a broad range of people and social groups, stretch across different economic sectors, policy fields, and academic disciplines. They cannot be disentangled from their wider context, social context, and there is a high uncertainty about their future development, just as we often don't even know what needs to be known to deal with these questions. Traditional urban policy processes and the organizational and institutional structures underpinning them are not well equipped to deal with such types of problems and long-term transformative change. If we reflect about the types of new capacities, organizational culture, policy processes that would be needed to deal with such types of social and technical transformation, potential links to social sciences and particularly engaged social sciences become obvious, I think. Governing transformative change processes such as a more just and equitable energy transition depends, on the one hand, for example, on anticipatory capacities, not in the sense of making prognosis of future developments, but as a capacity to imagine and envision alternative futures, create narratives of change, and develop policies towards them. Social sciences, in a broad sense, including literature or climate fiction, for example, could play an increasing role in increasing this imaginative space for policy making. An energy and climate transition will require an increased capacity for collaboration across different types of actor groups, from public administration, business and civil society, as well as collaboration and integration across often separated policy fields. In practice, municipalities often have difficulties to work even across different departments in their own organization, as we see in our engagement and research projects with them. Municipalities are in need of greater capacities for experimentation and learning. They need institutionalized infrastructures for testing new solutions and alternative configurations of energy generation and use. Also here, I think an engaged social science can provide not only process-oriented knowledge for making such experiments more inclusive, giving voice to marginalized actors, and help making sense of the changes and experiences made with implementing such alternative approaches. Not least, engaging in long-term transformative change also requires a different kind of capacity to evaluate and monitor ongoing change with an orientation to reflection, learning, continuous adaptation. Also here, I think social sciences can be of great use, not only to provide critical feedback on these change processes, but also to provide procedural support, develop strategies to put incremental changes in the context of broader transformative goals. Such municipal capacities to govern an energy and climate transition rather sound, as I mentioned them just now, sound like a normative wish list of a social scientist and transition researcher than a description of political practice. And indeed, it is crucial to keep in mind that such strategies to govern the climate transition do not take place in a socially empty space and cannot be separated from broader socio-political developments, existing power relation, and historically developed conditions and contexts. Attempts to introduce such new policies and initiatives thus typically have to navigate social conflicts and controversies and are infested with attempts to reframe them in ways which rather suits the interests and perspectives of powerful established actors. That's what we also have to deal with if we try to engage in these processes and also try to engage in developing new types of strategies and solutions. Critical, reflexive, and engaged social science, and this is the main point I would like to make in my talk here, still can play a crucial role, I think, in building such capacities in cities, not only instrumentally, but also as critical partners trying to unpack and question the activities and implementation of governance strategies aiming at an energy or climate transitions. Universities in general and social sciences in particular for sure cannot provide ready-made solutions to the complex problems which we are facing, but they can engage in a co-production process of knowledge with other societal actors and in a joint reflections on these processes of change. Such types of intervention certainly are not always welcomed with open arms, and it may often feel like an uphill struggle in the practice of engagement now as a social scientist. Social science, which engages with analyzing social change and unpacking power relations almost with necessity, becomes embroiled in the conflicts and controversies around this change. A concrete case which I would like to refer to when an arena between municipalities, public authorities and universities has been created to collaborate on urban energy and climate transitions is the Swedish program Viable Cities, which encompasses 23 cities with together more than 40% of the Swedish population and which have committed also to become climate neutral by 2030. The program has so far offered a range of opportunities, I think, for critical social science engagement. The Program Office of Viable Cities here serves as a kind of intermediary organization which provides platforms for the interaction of cities and develops support structures to facilitate organizational cultural change in these cities, but also invites social scientists to engage with these change processes. Moreover, other public authorities such as the Swedish Energy Agency or the Innovation Agency Vinnova use this program as a testing ground to develop new types of transformation-oriented policies and interventions. I myself and colleagues from social sciences and other disciplines have been involved for several years now in this climate neutral cities program and have attempted to contribute also with critical reflexive social science perspectives and engage in collaborative action together with public and civil society actors. As we have experienced there is a very palpable tension also between many urban actors, on the one hand showing an acute awareness of the need to do things differently and to do politics and governance differently, and the need to to link energy and climate transition to questions of justice, equity, or the vulnerability of different social groups. On the other hand, we still see this dominant logic of of our cooperation partners in cities trying to be a smooth operator, so to say, to not disturb established structures and handling energy and climate change in a rather technocratic fashion, like other policy problems before. Without doubt, municipalities or public authorities are no homogeneous organizations themselves, so part of the social science engagement also consists of creating alliances with interested actors and relies on a small number of cooperation partners in these municipalities very often. If we try to take stock of the different studies and interventions of social scientists in this climate transition program, Viable Cities, just as an example again, I would like to structure these along David Chandler's strategies of mapping, sensing, acting, as expressed in his book Ontopolitics of the Anthropocene. Mapping can be seen as the tracing of internal relations in situated social material arrangements in the energy system as a precondition of policy intervention in such processes. It is about contextualizing and situating change, about deconstructing, unpacking the politics inherent in different urban interventions for transformative change. Most of the social science research in this program actually, I think, belongs to this category of developing a critical constructive companionship to urban agents of change. An example would be social science studies of urban smart grid experiments, which have been carried out in many Swedish cities, which turn out to be, so these experiments, to be configured in a way actually which keeps established energy system actors in control of the change process, just as social science analysis and analysis reveal the limitedness of systematic learning processes in such experiments. Ideally, such research could serve as a corrective to the capture of policy instruments by different social groups and as an opportunity to adapt and adjust change strategies. In practice, such studies have, however, been met with, on the one hand, with interest by urban actors, but so far only had a very marginal influence on policy making, I would say, self-critically also there. In a more contextualizing perspective, other social science projects in Viable Cities have drawn attention to the interwovenness of our energy and transport system with broader socioeconomic structures in our society, highlight the inseparability of an energy transition and comprehensive societal transformation processes. A particular topic has been, for example, which have become much more important, questions of equity, justice, vulnerability, social marginalization in transition process, a field where SID also has already provided valuable insights and contributions. At best, such studies can contribute to develop a greater public and political awareness for such questions and create alignments also across different policy domains. Another group of social science studies in the Viable Cities program can be seen as contributing to sensing as a different type of strategy, which aims to make ongoing socio-technical change processes and transformation legible and visible. Cities and public authorities currently struggle with finding ways to assess transformative change processes and establish processes for a long learning-oriented monitoring of ongoing change. Social science studies are engaging in the development of new metrics and indicators for transformation processes. And also in this context, for sure, a reflexive and critical approach of social science is crucial. And as Sid himself has pointed out in his studies, metrics also distribute, for example, accountability in different ways. Soon. In different ways, and certainly are not neutral measurements of change. At the same time, such indicators can be seen as sites of social imagination and are closely interrelated with developing visions and imaginaries of different futures by urban actors. To mention shortly, the third one would be strategies of hacking, which are more about creating new connections and associations in processes of change. An interesting example is the project, I won't say much about this, Carbon Ruins, an exhibition of the fossil fuel area, which created an exhibition situated in the year 2053, looking back at the phasing out of fossil fuels, which aims also at the participatory form of world building that allows for new ways of knowing in relation to the post-fossil transition. So just to conclude, my attempt to identify, reflect and act social science approaches in the context of urban energy and climate transition in Sweden, one can say that the ongoing energy and climate transformation requires governance capacities in cities and other places, which may greatly profit from critical, engaged, action-oriented social sciences. They can contribute developing visions of the future, making change processes visible, governable, to link the energy transition to broader societal questions. But just as a last point, I think we also have to be self-aware, and Sid has pointed this out, that the root causes of these limited collaborations, which we actually see there, lie as much at the side of academia, academic cultures, institutions, funding structures, career paths, still make it difficult to develop transdisciplinary long-term engagements and build capabilities to collaborate. So reflect and act, thus should be also seen as a general wake-up call for academia, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harald. I see several parallels to the previous intervention already. I noticed the use of the word alliances and the making of alliances and what should they be and who should make them. And also you point to very concrete sites of intervention like the city and tools like metrics, which is something that has occupied Sid a lot. And I think then we are also pointing to science, engineering and technology, and I think hopefully this provides a good transition to the last presentation I'm very happy to introduce the last speaker, Andy Sterling. He's a professor of science and technology policy at the University of Sussex at the Science Policy Research Unit. I think there he became particularly known for being the leader of the STEP Center, which was about pathways to sustainability, which has now ended, the center. But with a huge impact. His research deals with issues of uncertainty, politics, power, and diversity in fields such as energy, biotechnology, and biodiversity. He has published widely and impactfully on science policy and has broad experience from activism and interdisciplinary research projects, as well as policy advice on a number of scales and levels. So, Andy, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Kjetil, and thank you very much, and congratulations, Siddharth, Sareen, for winning the award of the Nils Klim Prize. It's a real pleasure to be here and a great honor, and thanks for inviting me to the committee as well. And thanks, Siddharth, for also producing, as you've just read, such an engaging and insightful and highly motivating talk on the challenges around transforming energy systems. So my own, among many rich cues, which other speakers have taken up really well, my own starting point lies in something I know that Sid, like others, has thought about a lot, which is a very tricky, but nonetheless still often neglected challenge in this field. And it's nicely framed maybe by Sid's own highlighting, as Harald just nicely riffed on, of act and reflect. So my talk will pivot on, yes, the need to act for social scientists, for academics in general, in speaking truth to power about the implications of the climate crisis and the imperative energy transition. But also, in speaking truth to power, we need to reflect, which we are sometimes not so good at, on how power shapes truth. How the truth that we are so earnestly speaking is itself imprinted by the effects of power and privilege in the societies in which we live. I'd like to pick up the cue to talk about the Anthropocene, because I actually feel that the Anthropocene framing that is prevalent throughout this field does this in a rather worrying way. But to be more, to use a more widely established notion, let's think about it in terms of transformation itself. Because talk of transformation trips lightly off the tongue nowadays. Maybe, I know with Sid we can ask a bit too lightly. Because it's strange that this ostensible, radical enthusiasm has become, around the world, especially evident in incumbent, elite, highly privileged policy, corporate, and academic circles. There is scarcely a funding program in the world that does not have some strand ostensibly dedicated to what it calls transformation. And, of course, the backdrop to this is in good faith. We know that with the official voice of more than 190 countries around the world, the UN aims at nothing less nowadays than transforming our world, leaving no one behind. And by this, then, it means that energy transitions, like other challenges subsumed under this agenda, is about not only achieving a radical change to the way energy is consumed and produced, but to eradicating hunger, again, to use the words of the UN, saving the climate, achieving gender equality, peaceful societies, ending poverty in all its forms everywhere. For anyone who speaks of sustainable energy, that is what it is officially, by the most conservative institutions, stated with metrics that should mean. So are we doing justice to this challenge? It's clear from the global goals where transformation is supposed to head. But here's an interest, there's much could be said, but let's just think of one point here. What exactly is it in politics that we're actually transforming? And I find it almost comical how there is no answer to that. As we've heard really eloquently in the earlier talk, capitalism sometimes comes through from the more self-consciously radical side, which I would very much, I've learned it's not empathy, it's sympathy from this morning's discussion. So capitalism, maybe, but actually it is notoriously easier to envisage the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Seriously, to envisage that, whether a bit critical or less so. And yet, this is where the rubber hits the road on this point. What needs to be changed for sustainability is quite self-evidently bigger than capitalism. This thing that we are so unable to imagine the end of is actually too small. Because after all, I don't think it's controversial to observe that fascism of different kinds, state communism of different kinds, at least equally infringed the global goals in the way I just summarized them. And these extended beyond any variety of capitalism. So the thing that the whole world states itself as being aiming to transform is bigger than capitalism. And yet, as I and many others have experienced, if you do any kind of work for national and international policy processes, to even the mention of capitalism, never mind the critique, the mention of capitalism is actively deprecated. I've been present when it has been edited out in large industrial amounts from assessments that are being developed. So what then to make of this language of transformation that is eviscerated of this key point? So taking a cue from Sid's own attention to incumbent power in his work and in his talk, what I think this indicates to be at work are powerful processes of political justification, the imprint of power in knowledge, of a kind that goes under-reflected on. Because power, and the deeper and the more pervasive the forms it takes, the more this is true, will use all available language to blinker out inconvenient factors, to justify closure around prevailing directions for change, to secure acceptance and trust and blame management. These are well-known dynamics of power. There is no language, there is no vocabulary, no matter how radical, that can avoid that effect. So, and sometimes when we talk about what words should we use, as if somehow words can be pristine, they cannot be pristine. If we find ourselves hoping so, we are at our most vulnerable. So recognizing this then, and the scale of the challenge that the UN itself has outlined, I think personally a good name, taking inspiration from some of the literatures that we were just hearing discussed this morning in the Holberg Prize Symposium, that it's colonial modernity, something bigger and more expansive than capitalism that we're actually looking to transform, even though that goes very rarely, most usually without a name. But whatever the name we might want to give it, it is this wider and deeper reality that energy transformations must also address if they are to not be captured by the hidden formations responsible for the structures of these energy systems. Otherwise, we make ourselves very vulnerable to being manipulated inadvertently, to what has been put in some recent papers in the field, Lampedusan transformations, after the work, the famous Italian literary work, where everything, small things, need to seem to change so that large things can remain the same. So let's just look at some concrete examples of that. And as Sid, again, is highly aware and has, in fact, worked on how these debates are vulnerable to capture, let's think about carbon capture and storage. Now, I don't want to offend anyone, certainly in this country particularly, but that carbon capture and storage retains any credibility whatsoever is only explicable by reference to these processes, to the patronage in particular exercised by fossil fuel wealth and power. And even more so when we see the ease with which discussions of carbon capture run into climate geoengineering, an extraordinary discourse, well known to be pioneered by the military as a means to global projection of control. And again, these military interests are older and more pervasive than capitalism. Likewise, nuclear energy. If you look at I don't know how it is in Norway, but in many countries it's the case now that the attention in the popular press to achieving zero carbon, nuclear energy has a remarkable share of that discussion in public debate. And again, if you just look even the most cursory way at the performance characteristics of nuclear as a supposed zero carbon option, it is so small, the contribution that is and can be made, so slow, so ineffective, so costly, that it is in fact an opportunity cost that is slowing down climate action. This is not, I don't think, should not be, in a world not imprinted by power, a controversial point. And yet, nuclear is so prominent because those polities that we call democracies are utterly subverted on this issue by military interest again. And the scale of this recent work is only beginning to show. Likewise, renewable energy, as Sid has looked at and mentioned in his talk, the way these are pursued, as with energy efficiency, also typically reflect pressures for appropriation, exclusion, extraction, concentration, accumulation, things we take for granted as realities of the world that have characterized, of course, capitalism, where huge insights on these processes have emerged in critical thought, But it is also older and deeper than capitalism. And again, colonial modernity is, I think, the only framing in which that sits. But the problem is colonial modernity is even less acceptable in these debates. It's taken almost as an insulting, in some quarters, especially policy quarters, as an insulting reference point to normative. So, as Sid emphasizes in his own reference to the challenge of steering, none of these kinds of changes to energy infrastructures and practices do justice to the real meaning of transforming our world. Hard though the job is to get attention to the modest agenda, it does not do a justice to it. And what we're in danger of, that each may seem a modest concession to some minimal metric or two of sustainability, but when measured by the stated ambitions, and I refer again to the UN, of transformation, none of these kinds of change that I mentioned in the energy sector live up to anything more than being incremental, to continuing business as usual, and if they are interpreted as being transformative, then they are not part of any kind of solution, even incremental. They are part of the problem. So, the high-profile sustainable energy strategies, like those I mentioned and others, are deeply imprinted by incumbent interests that remain entirely untransformed and threaten to leave the world similarly unchanged. So how then to do this in the spirit of Sid's own inspiring work, in ways that do justice to these imperatives of sustainability? And here, to pick up Sid's central focus in his talk now, let's look at social science. Of course, only a small part of the picture, but the one we're today concerned with. How can this live up to the ambitions of spanning justice, ecology, and planetary destiny in the ways that we've heard about? Well, I think we can learn lessons, as Sid's own work picks up on very nicely, from the discussions, again, of this morning, decolonial scholarship, feminist scholarship, as has also been mentioned. The answer lies not so much in the cherished disciplinary doctrines of academia and social science, and the privileged institutional practices, whether they be disciplinary or interdisciplinary. It's in the politics of democratic struggle, not just alliances, but actually enacting those identities, enacting one's own work as a scholar, as a form of struggle. Because more than the authority of technical expertise that so dominates the energy transitions field, I would say that the challenge is also presented to civil society and social movements too, in case I'm in danger of romanticizing them. So for instance, and again, despite the huge respect I have for the movements I mentioned now, the call by Greta Thunberg to panic, or the Friday for the Future urging in banners, in protests, to do what the science says. Or James Lovelock's scarcely a more elevated icon of environmentalism, his own injunction to put democracy on hold. I worry very deeply about how these kinds of authoritarianism, this totalitarian language in favor of science, promising what science can never deliver. Evidence cannot be based on policy. Whether we like it or not, there are other factors, and the adjudication of those other factors is a matter for democracy and democratic struggle. So this totalitarian language helps catalyze and provoke other kinds of authoritarianism in the world. And if we double down on this language, thinking somehow we'll resist those other emerging forms of totalitarianism, then we're gravely mistaken, because we are provoking them. We are part of the same move. So I would say then, to wind up my talk, it's only through bottom-up, unruly, horizontal, and mutualistic collective action that progressive transformations have ever occurred. We all have our different experiences. My knowledge is woefully thin on many of them, but I think you can look very hard at examples from moves away, and they're not complete, any of these moves, from slavery, from colonialism, from workers' rights, from worker oppression, towards women's emancipation, gay liberation, the welfare state. Think of whatever are the progressive struggles that you cherish most dearly. Were any of these primarily driven by orderly, top-down, sound scientific, evidence-based policymaking, global assessments of the kind that somehow we've become inured into thinking will cause the present transformation? How can that be? It's a very serious dissonance at the heart of our community. Because although policymaking, academia, business played honorable roles in all of these, they were not the drivers. These wider, deeper politics of transformation take place through collective action, through creative expression, through cultural change, more than through evidence-based policy, planetary dashboards. Where is a dashboard? It's in the cockpit. Is there a cockpit? No. There is no cockpit. So why are we making dashboards? We're making dashboards to justify the very notions of power that actually we think of ourselves as resisting. So I take inspiration then in nature, in murmurating dynamics of fish and birds. When the time is right, things change radically through horizontally coordinated, unruly, mutualistic movements, not fear-driven but hope-driven, not singular but plural. Many of the characteristics that Siddharth and other colleagues have actually emphasized. And this, for the want of better terms, it's not a dichotomy because there's many dimensions, but it's a move away from controlling transitions in energy as elsewhere towards more convivial and caring kinds of transformation that do justice to the issues that bring us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andy. What a great ending to this great panel. I will now invite the participants to take a seat up at the stage, and we will then have a discussion in terms of, or a symposium. Maybe the three of you will sit in the middle. Sid, will you sit over there, perhaps? Can maybe the three of you be in the middle, and then I sit here? Okay. Great. Okay, do you hear us well? We have now transitioned to these wearable microphones. There is some signal here. I'm not sure what it is. I mean, this is a panel to the honor of Sid. I would perhaps first and foremost give the word to him. Do you want to comment on these three similar but also different and highly inspiring interventions by the colleagues that you have invited?
Sure, thanks. I would be happy to, and I want to start by saying thank you so much for being here, for engaging, for all of your work is very inspiring, so it's a real honor and privilege to get to sort of share this discussion. I'm very grateful that you've taken up the invitation. I also think that it's fair to say I'm grateful for the very, very fair points you've raised, and I can get us started on unpacking them a little bit more, and then I'm curious how this lands with you and others. I think that one of the things that is key in how far we've come this past hour and a half is how do we go about building broader constituencies, building momentum for the kind of change you want to see, given that the power structures that obtain are quite keen to shut down any possibility of real change. Ingolfur Bludorn expressed this now 17 years ago as sustaining the unsustainable. And I keep going back to that because it points out that this is all sort of a decoration, that whatever wins we have are, very minor compared to the immediacy of the what's required and the scale of it. But I think there's also a risk in that, that we lose part of what draws people together, what helps build alliances, the need to have some form of, not faith, but aspiration, a capacity to aspire, as being intrinsic to agency itself. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that, because everybody's weighed in on this idea of the need for coalition building, but also the difficulty of doing it while being realistic about the odds at hand. I think it's difficult for social scientists staying true to that focus that I've tried to put into play here. I think it's fair to say that we don't hold the key to power. We can't unlock the golden gates to whatever by ourselves. But I'm often aware in my own work that we have the tremendous privilege of being paid to think and to engage with others who are acting in all kinds of situated ways. And not just to think sort of in splendid isolation in some sort of ivory tower setting, but to think in and across those very many different contexts where change has to happen, where it's happening in some ways. We agree, I think, in this setting, not enough, not hardly as much as we need, not fast enough, not just enough. But if it's happening in those settings, then that's also where we can identify and do identify things that are blocking it. And to call them out is not simply about speaking truth to power as an intellectual commitment. It's about calling out the villains in the room and sometimes showing that they're not actually villains, they're not actors with bad intent. They're well-meaning people who perceive more than they're able to act on within the demarcations of quite defined roles, where if they go beyond the line, they will be shunted out and somebody else will be put in their place. They're figureheads. We think they're practitioners, but in fact they are bounded by the same invisible threads that stop us, that stymie action, that leave us sort of these stick figures that aren't moving forward, but just shuffling around the deck. And I think if we view it like that, then we're in a very powerful position to unlock the possibilities for action, not by always pointing to power and to the one in the cockpit as the one who needs to steer us right, but asking why everybody else is on board that same machine, moving with a particular momentum to a particular target, whether that is the target, whether we shouldn't all get off and have a picnic in the sunny stretch of grass that we're hurtling past. And I think that's where it's about coalition building beyond forces of power, beyond particular powerful actors. It's about calling out those elites among the much larger group that doesn't want that life, that doesn't want that control, that doesn't benefit from it, and that doesn't always understand that it doesn't have to be this way. It's about building, and this is the last point I want to make for now, it's about building the kind of future we want to see in the present, not in its totality, because we don't have the means by ourselves, but in its principles, in its founding mechanisms, putting those in motion and inviting in others who are better at communication, who are better at projection, who are better at impact in various different situated settings, to join us in that party and make that the party people want to be at, so that we can poop the other party.
Well, thank you, Sid. So any responses from the panel? Andy?
Just to get a little free song going. I think you're absolutely right, and you put it very well, Sid, about don't name call, don't accuse individuals, don't individual actors. I think it's true both ethically and also tactically. But I'm not that it conflates, and I'm uncertain here, and that's a feature of caring transformation beyond controlling. The uncertainty is so important. So I'm not sure, but I think that it's not good to extrapolate that to don't challenge power. I think we can all challenge power. It's not powerful actors, it's power itself. Not because power is necessarily bad, but it becomes bad when it's not challenged. So we have to challenge it. And this is a pan-political agenda, I think. It's something, tragically, the right are picking up with the authoritarian populism, actually. They are challenging power in a way that the left is in danger of not doing because it sees power as a means to its end. And so I think that's kind of at the axis of our issue here. And I would say we can challenge power together. And it's only because modernity, a colonial modernity, is so blind to agency of any form other than what's in the individual, typically male, white, middle-class cranium, but agency. It can't see agency in society. It calls it a conspiracy if you speak of the agency of interests of cultures. But they have agency, and coloniality, decolonial struggle has illustrated that and gives tools, as has feminism, for dealing with it. And so we can then identify these agencies without accusing individuals. And just at a personal level, finally, I found that can work in government committees. You can speak with people from big transnationals and say, typically in the pub, but you can have a conversation about this, that we're all affected by these structures. It's not name-calling. So I do think we have to challenge power centrally, otherwise we will be subverted.
Great, thank you, Andy. Harald?
Yeah, but I think you can, find allies even in powerful institutions to challenge power, I think. So I totally agree, with your analysis, how much also, the language of transitions and the terms have been taken over by powerful elites and rigged to do the opposite, actually, what they were initially intended to do. But there, I think, you can still, there are people within those institutions who are interested in creating coalitions also with science. If you think just about this little example I gave on indicators and metrics, for example, where you still can show, how also metrical systems are imbued by power structures, where you can, and where you find allies, I think, also in institutions, like public authorities, where you can develop also alternative strategies to think about, indicators. Then, for example, by bringing in, activist citizens and different social groups. So I think it's not excluding each other. I think you have to work for both. You need this radical critique, but I think you can still build alliances with these institutions which are at the same time underpinning these power structures.
This sounds good. I think, I mean, we should also return to some part of the topic of the day, which is energy and its energy infrastructures. And we are talking about here quite technical, Andy mentions infrastructures, and Harald mentions the use of metrics. So does that indicate that power today is also imbricated with these very technical issues? And this is part of the problem that we are struggling to understand and articulate and communicate. Yeah. What is the role of science, engineering, and the technical fields there, and also for collaboration?
I have a personality defect. I'm always enthusiastic, but I think people do.
Well, okay. I'm not very good at thinking and talking at the same time, but I'm going to give it a try. But I think there's a risk to think, because now technology is apolitical. So all of them are, there's a politics behind it. So I don't think really like the challenge, I don't think it's technical. It's technical. I think the challenge is political. That, pointing out that, is very important. To repeat that, it's not the challenge of technology. It's a politics of technology, which might be the challenge. And I've read some reports about youth being in Europe and in general in the world being very sad and depressed, and then the explanation is that it's social media, because now we can blame social media for everything. But at the same time, I read, it was in the Financial Times a couple of days ago, how the conservative populist right is using TikTok for spreading their message, and it's not TikTok, it's not the mobile, it's the fact that we have a generation who, for the first time, most likely will have a less good life than the previous generation. And that is frustrating. And I think I feel very fortunate to do most of my work in rural areas, and then I come in contact with other people than the crowd that is here, or even in cities. And you see that there are things that we tend to talk about at the university that will make absolutely no sense to people who are struggling. So yeah, I leave it there.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, I'll put this more starkly just to try to be brief and graphic, but we complain about the post-truth invented facts of opponents of sustainability and climate change. And yet I've been complicit through my career in processes that are extremely in good faith with people I feel enormously solidarity with, of pretending, of perpetrating post-truth falsities around indicators. So I know of no indicator which always comes from a model: life cycle assessment, input-output analysis, cost-benefit, risk assessment, all the metrics that are dear to our hearts in this field. I know no such model that does not generate a bewildering array of different, equally valid outcomes, depending on tiny modulations of assumptions, parameters, variables, within the domain of reasonable. It's not non-factual. The non-fact is that we are routinely, and the IPCC are routinely complicit in pretending that that's not the case. That you can have evidence-based policy, that the policy can be based on the evidence. And I feel that's the biggest post-truth fiction of our times. And so on indicators, you know, one of the ways we can do this, it's not rocket science. We just tell the truth about that. When we present a model, you don't give your elevator pitch to the minister that we're supposed to be trained from a young age as academics. What's your elevator pitch? Refuse elevator pitches, because that's not conveying truth. That's nothing to do with truth. It's to do with providing justification to power. The minister wants a single story that then they can rest their authority on, and if it goes wrong, they blame someone else. Why are we playing that game? So it's not about quantification per se. Quantify, but do so in a plural way. And that way is one way I think you engender then the political struggles, because it's left more open what democracy should be about. But we find it very hard to do that.
So then it's politics, as Marielle is alluding to, but it's also caught up in a practice of metrics that renders politics sort of meaningless to the wider public.
We're subverting it, yes.
Harald?
Yeah, but it is, you know, an attempt to politicize then these technocratic structures, technologies, indicators, showing also, you know, the conflicts behind them and, you know, what they are actually doing. So I didn't, you know, it's not about buying into a certain measure then, but I think you can use it also in processes of, you know, interaction of different social groups and around conflicts, and using them to repoliticize processes where they were used actually to depoliticize in a sense, you know, and make it seem like evidence-based and rational or whatever.
Yes.
At the same time, we do have examples or cases, no, of metrics, because we seem to be caught up in this metrification of everything. We need numbers for the climate goals, for the sustainable goals, and for the actions that we want to take, be they, you know, carbon markets or what have you. Are there also good examples from that you know about, from more local activities where metrics have been used for activist purposes, constructively? I mean, can we avoid it?
I'm reminded of a couple of things. One is some work we did along with Håvard Harstad and Terje Vanvik in this city on the zero growth objective in Norway, which says that in the cities, well, I won't say the large cities, but the cities of size that we have in Norway should not grow the absolute number of cars. Otherwise, they lose out on a large chunk of the transport funding, which comes from the federal part. And the good thing about that indicator is it's relatively simple. It's zero. That's also part of its provenance. But I'm also reminded of a conversation with Andy some 6 years ago now, where you said that the SDGs, which you have, you know, rightfully critiqued, are also the best example of a global scale, deliberative, elaborate exercise over years that we have. And that claim making then can extend to seeing what we have and working with that Those are the tools at our disposal, and I've been part of that process in the SDG 7 review on energy and seen how we can improve those metrics. So I looked at metrics of energy poverty in various European settings to try to see how we can best work with what we have, because numbers do matter. And if we sort of say, if we shun them, we get into another dangerous sort of territory where anything goes, and then what I say and what you say is mainly a matter of whose mic hasn't been switched off yet. and I think that, to me, kind of moves the topic a little bit to this question of what do we as empirical scientists, right, social scientists, we work with empirics, that's one of our strengths. What are we well positioned to do? And I think part of it is we act relationally. We don't deal in absolutes, and any kind of indicator, metric ends up boiled down to some essence that is devoid of context in its laid strip bare essence. I think our strength is in situating some of those claims in particular contexts, in taking them to the actors who then act on them. And then if they don't act on them, in holding them to account. That's also, accountability is sort of a relational thing in its phenomenology. It takes place through various practices of what you can legitimate. And if you take away the possibility for people to justify certain claims, because you can show that, like what you do with nuclear in your work, you show that it's not what you're talking about. You're not saying, you can say the quiet part out loud, because they won't do it. Yep. And then you want others to step in. I think we struggle with the part where others need to step in. Yeah. I don't know, in a sense, to throw the question back. What can we do about that? Without saying that society is silly and should learn from social scientists, can we change that?
Yeah.
Can we?
Well, just to answer your question, and part of that answer to that question as well, where is this done? I'd say there's a host of methods. Like Cinderella, they're not invited to the party so often, but dissensus conferences, open space, interactive modelings, Q method, multi-criteria mapping. These are all tools, quantitatively as well as qualitatively, that explore the contingencies and represent the outcome not as a single storyline, but as a multiplicity. And that's how to achieve, I think, the crucial accountability Sid just raised. But if you simply say this is the outcome of my model with a singular answer, you're actually suppressing accountability. And the SDGs, I mean, there's a reason why the economists call them the stupid development goals, and why I think they're a crucial resource, is because they're so inconveniently plural. The grand challenges, the Anthropocene, planetary boundaries, try and narrow down more. The SDGs are gloriously, 169 metrics, they're gloriously plural. And yet, nowhere in them is military domination, private profit, or national interest. So they're so plural, so it seems, and it's not anything goes, because those things that drive the world are not in there. That's really important.
It also seems that in terms of metrics, policymakers favor the simple metrics, the non-plural metrics, and this seems to be a quite settled way of our institutions and their way of working. So how do we get beyond this?
Challenge power.
Yeah.
But I also think, if I may, is that we used to do politics and policy in different ways before. So the way we do it today is not the way we have always done it. And that also applies to our universities, to the way in which we do research and what is value as research. And that, I think, also our universities need to be reformed somehow. And along with the way in which we do policies and policy making, and this, I think this, this neoliberal way of thinking or pervading absolutely every sphere of our lives is a way of disciplining us and stopping us from thinking in different ways. And then that, I think that needs to be challenged. Also, a lot of politicians are, and that's why maybe why the populist right gather so many, or not so many, because it's not that many, but some support, because they act and look more like average people. They are the ones challenging power and questioning the way in which we do things. I don't agree, of course. I'm not saying that it's the way to go, but I think that there's something there that we can think and reflect about what's gone wrong.
Well, so there is a huge task there of historical reflection, critical reflection, and reconstruction that needs to be done. But I also wonder if we should look at things in a more Sid-like way, which is also constructive, and his prefigurative politics. Looking at, should we, so I mean, speaking truth to power, criticizing power is one task that we need to stay with it. Do we also need to articulate alternative kinds of futures that are perhaps not so embedded with existing structures? And where do we find them? I mean, increasingly, people are also developing techniques, also academics, scenarios that could be, evolve out of academic fields, but also creating them together with publics and activists and so on, policymakers, also corporate world. Do you use these kind of techniques in your own work? What kind of future should we create?
I try to pay respect to them myself, and I know we all do in different ways. Not enough, and I don't know enough, but also especially from global southern settings, decolonial love, Pachamama, Ubuntu, eco-Swaraj. There are bodies of practice in social movements, forms of collective action, but also prefiguration that are always tied together, of course. They're not separate, but they are important to respect both. So I think opening up for someone, especially a privileged northern setting person like myself, opening the space and leaving it open, not articulating the one storyline, but trying to challenge power so that a space is opened up for these things to be more visible, but others may know more.
I mean, we do work also, but I think it's really about opening up spaces also to see that things could be otherwise, so to say. And there, I think also, historically research, we always think about, scenarios and these types of sometimes more managerial tools, but they can be used really in many different ways. But what we try to do in science and technology studies or in historical studies, where you show, how contingent and which social configurations, how actually politics has played out in making structures in technologies as they are now. I think also this can open up such spaces and showing that it could be differently, and there are possibilities to get out of these tracks. There has been historical shifts and so on.
Thank you.
I feel like we do this in all sorts of ways, and that those ways are not just part of some sort of repertoire of now we engage with others, but that it's part of our academic practice as it's a learning thing, whether it's collaborating with artists or collaborating as artists, or it's creating structured processes of exchange among particular experts, practitioners who don't have the time and opportunity to meet with each other and exchange at depth across their siloed modes of practice. So there's countless examples, but I think what, for me, is really useful out of that is that it helps me reflect on the boundaries of one's own influence, on the blind spots in our own perception, in somebody else's articulation of what they see as the barriers, the challenges, but also the possibilities for action, the kind of sources of inspiration that they sometimes cite and that you're not always aware of because it's coming from another sort of praxis. So it's also a very generative space. I like how you mentioned conviviality towards the end of your talk, and I think that those convivial spaces are important both in that transdisciplinary setting as well as in this sort of setting, which is why I'm very grateful for the opportunity and this sort of occasion and your engagement, because I think at its best, the academy allows for that. At its worst, it becomes something of the sort you referred to with technocratic. It becomes sort of full of administration and metricized spaces of conduct. And since we are all aware of the importance of analyzing the conduct of conduct, I think we need to be quite reflexive about it and quite self-critical in modes that we've been co-opted into. So I very much echo that sense of going back to asking both how did we get here, but also what are we doing here, and to stay honest about it.
Thank you very much. I think the notion of the academy as a convivial space is a nice note to end on, and perhaps also for pointing towards better, more sustainable, desirable futures, at least for the academic world. I'm looking at Björn. Do we have time for questions for the public, or no? Sorry about that. We got so caught up.
Conviviality.
There is one. But okay, so then we will simply thank all the discussants, and we will especially thank Sid, of course, for introducing this and for inviting this lovely panel. And, well, that's it. Thanks to the audience. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
A convivial space it is, but we apologize for there not being time for discussion, but I hope you've enjoyed the discussion here as much as I have. I have at least learned a lot about sort of rethinking how to act, rethinking also elevator pitches, being wary of the notion of transformation, and much, much else. I would first like for us to thank the 2024 Nils Klim Laureate, Siddharth Sareen. So let's give him a round of applause. And in addition to our moderator, Kjetil Lommetveit, I think we should also thank the symposiates, Harald Roracher, Marielle Aguilar-Stern, and Andy Sterling, and I think you've all made beautiful contributions to this symposium. Last but not least, I would like to thank the audience who's joined us here in the Aula today, and those that have followed this event online. Now, this concludes the program here in the Aula today. But please note that there is a conversation tonight at the House of Literature here in Bergen between the two laureates, Achille Mbembe and Siddharth Sareen, that will be moderated by Kari Jegerstedt. There are some few spaces left, so please go online and register for that and be early for that event. The doors open, I think, at 5:30, so be there not later than 5:45. Tomorrow, there are other programs here in the University Aula, two major events. First, we have the masterclass, which is a discussion between the Holberg Prize laureate, Professor Achille Mbembe, and 5 PhD students from across the Nordic countries. That's at 10 sharp. And at 2 o'clock, the Holberg laureate, Professor Achille Mbembe, will give his Holberg lecture here in this room. Both will also be streamed, so please join us back for any of these 3 events, either today or tomorrow. But for now, thank you, and let's give another round of applause for our symposium.